Hi everybody, welcome to The Wife of Caesar. As you know, The Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using words that everybody can understand so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. Okay, so today I will talk to you about Novartis, the Swiss pharmaceutical giant, which was very recently involved in a corruption scandal that cost it around $1 billion US. Okay, so now what happened was let's start at the beginning. Novartis AG, that's Novartis Switzerland, has subsidiaries, companies that it owns in several countries, and three of these countries are Greece, the US, and South Korea. Now, these are relevant because they were the ones in the center of this scandal. Through its subsidiaries, Novartis AG, the parent company, does business in the USA. Now, when we say does business, we mean that it sells its products, yes, but also that it trades its securities in United States stock exchanges. Essentially, you can buy shares of stock of Novartis in New York or in different stock exchanges in the US. This is important because that simple fact gives authorities in the US, the government of the US, jurisdiction over any illegal activity that Novartis might engage in. Novartis Greece and South Korea engaged in paying bribes in a scheme to pay bribes to doctors in state-owned hospitals in Greece. Now, remember that a state-owned hospital is a hospital or a clinic that serves the public but is owned at least partially by the government of a country. In this case, it was owned, or these hospitals and clinics were owned by the government of Greece. Now, Novartis would simulate different conventions and speaking engagements, and they would use those engagements or those events as a pretext to furnish these doctors with hotel expenses, travel expenses, and luxury and expensive meals. Now, these were, again, they were simulated. Some of these events never actually took place, and the doctors were merely receiving the money or the luxury expenses. Now, those bribes were paid allegedly in exchange for prescriptions. The doctors would then issue prescriptions to patients for medicine manufactured by Novartis. And that by itself is a crime, paying bribes to receive some type of benefit. However, it is also a crime to conceal the original bribery and try to pass it off as something else. In this case, Novartis decided to try to pass off those expenses, the bribes, as expenses for advertising and promotion. That by itself is an entirely different crime. Now, if that weren't enough, Novartis USA committed fraud against the federal government of the US. Now, the federal government runs a medical program or a healthcare program called Medicare. Under Medicare, different health services are provided to the citizens, and particularly to senior citizens. And under that program, there are many features, but one of those features is the copay. Now, the copay is a fixed amount, fixed payment that every user has to pay in order to have access to certain services. So let's say I were a user of Medicare and my copay was set at, say, $1,000. Then every time I needed to go to the doctor, I would pay $1,000. If I needed surgery, $1,000. If I needed, say, crutches, $1,000. And that amount does not go directly to the person providing the services or the accessories, but rather to the government, and the government pays the rest of the bill. So what Novartis did is they targeted patients who were using their medications, and Novartis would reimburse the copay to those patients because they knew that the doctors would prescribe them medication manufactured by Novartis, which was much more expensive than that copay, and this constitutes a fraud against the US government because they are manipulating the system to get paid. Now, most of the time we talk about the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the US law that punishes going abroad and paying bribes. However, in this particular case, because the conduct spanned over different industries and was different in nature, the US government had to get very creative, and they recruited different government agencies which then applied different statutes. Now, among the statutes applied were the False Claims Act, the Anti-Kickback Statute, and several different state laws. Now, under the False Claims Act, it is illegal to manipulate the system and present false bills to the US government for payment, right? And because they were trying to manipulate the Medicare program, this constituted an improper act under the FCA, and Novartis was fined $642 million. Oh, before that, for going abroad and paying bribes to the doctors in Greece, which were obviously government employees, they were fined the hefty amount of $445 million US. In addition, there is something called the Anti-Kickback Statute. It is a law in the US that prohibits corrupt payments in the context of the healthcare industry. So, by providing payments and improper payments or benefits to the doctors for those simulated events, they were violating the Anti-Kickback Statute, and they were fined $38.4 million. And finally, Novartis, in the course of that scheme, violated several other state laws. The state governments decided to join the actions brought by the federal government. The federal government actually represented the state governments, and for violating different state laws, Novartis was fined $48.1 million, totaling a little over, just over $1 billion US in total fines, disgorgement, confiscations, and all that good stuff. Now, because it involved several different agencies, it meant that Novartis had to execute different agreements. You remember how we've talked about DPAs, where you negotiate the administration of justice with criminal authorities? Well, here something very similar happened. It just meant that different authorities were involved, and obviously different statutes were applied, but essentially Novartis entered into several deals with government agencies to negotiate their punishment. Now, this is relevant because most of the time, compliance programs, those policies that companies use to prevent corruption, they tend to focus on one or two statutes like the FCPA or things like that. But from now on, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, companies will have to adjust those programs to also keep an eye on different agencies and on different statutes. That was it for today. Thank you for being with us. Remember to blow the whistle, denounce corruption. Every act of corruption should be denounced, but do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you're not sure that your security, your safety is guaranteed, don't do anything and refrain from acting. Reach out to people who might be able to help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@streiner.net. We'll be delighted to help you, but above all, please stay safe. Thank you for joining us at The Wife of Caesar.